The first time I said it, I was 23, and it was a joke. Lena was standing in her brother's kitchen in a bridesmaid dress. She'd clearly been forced into something satin, the color of a bruise, and she was eating cereal over the sink because the catering at Danny's engagement party hadn't included anything she actually wanted to eat. She had one strap falling off her shoulder, and a smear of what I would later learn was honey mustard on the hem, and she looked like someone who had made a series of reasonable decisions that had somehow led to an unreasonable situation, which, I would also later learn, was her permanent condition. I leaned in the doorway and said, "I'm going to marry you someday." She didn't look up from the cereal. "Get in line." "How long is the line?" "You're the first person in it." "That's still a line. I like those odds." She looked up then. Finally, with the spoon halfway to her mouth, and an expression that could only be described as a preliminary assessment. She was 21. She had her brother's dark eyes and none of his tendency toward filling silences. She looked at me for one long second and then went back to the cereal. "You're Danny's friend. From college. Carter. I know who you are," she said. "I've heard about you. Good things, I hope." "Mostly just one thing," repeated in several different ways. "What thing?" She put the bowl in the sink. "That you're the kind of person who makes a better first impression than a second one." She walked past me out of the kitchen, the satin dress rustling, the strap still falling. I stood there for a second and then laughed, alone, at nothing. I thought about that for weeks afterward. Here's what you need to know about Danny, so the rest of this makes sense. He was my closest friend through 4 years of college and the 3 years after. The kind of friendship that forms in shared hardship and calcifies into something you stop examining because it just is. We'd met in a documentary film seminar where neither of us had any business being. I was a communications major with no particular direction. He was pre-law doing an elective, and we'd spent a semester arguing about the same 3 films with increasing conviction and decreasing accuracy. By the end of the course, we'd seen every documentary Werner Herzog had ever made, and developed opinions about them that we held with the certainty of people who hadn't yet learned what certainty costs. I was a photographer, had been since I was 17, when my uncle left me a film camera in his will, along with a note that said, "You notice things. Use it." By the time I met Danny, I'd turned it into the early stages of a career commercial work, some editorial, a few assignments that were interesting and a lot that weren't. I was building something without knowing exactly what I was building. That's the honest accounting of that period. I had the tools and I was learning to use them, and I kept showing up. Danny's engagement party was June, 3 years after college. He was marrying a woman named Priya who was brilliant and warm, and exactly right for him in ways I recognized even from the outside. The party was at his parents' house, a large old colonial in the kind of suburb that has opinions about landscaping. His parents were pleased. The catering was extensive. The bridesmaid dress was the wrong color for everyone wearing it, and Lena was in the kitchen, eating cereal at 9 p.m., completely unimpressed by all of it. I knew she existed before that night. Danny had mentioned her, my younger sister. She's at art school. She's a little, and he'd always stopped there. Like the descriptor he was reaching for didn't quite fit. I understood why, after that kitchen. She wasn't a little anything. She was precisely, entirely herself, in a way that didn't leave room for softening adjectives. I was also, at the time, 6 months out of a relationship that had ended badly. Her name was Simone, and we'd been together for 2 years, and the ending was the kind that doesn't have a single moment you can point to, just a gradual withdrawal, until one morning, you're both standing in your kitchen not saying anything, and you both understand that the conversation you'd need to have is beyond what either of you is equipped for. She moved to Portland. I took a lot of photographs of empty rooms for about 3 months after. So that was my condition going into that kitchen in June. A man with a camera and some cleared-out space where something used to be, making jokes at a party to a woman in the wrong colored dress. I told Danny about it later. The cereal, the line, the thing about first and second impressions. He looked at me for a long time. Carter. What? That's my sister. I know who she is. I'm going to need you to consider what you're doing. I didn't do anything. I said something mildly flirtatious in a kitchen and she put me in my place and walked away. Right. He said it the way you say right when you mean the opposite, and now you're telling me about it at 11 p.m. I didn't have a good answer for that. I drank my beer. She's 21, he said. She's in her last year of school. She's the same stop, she's Lena. What does that mean? It means she's not someone you practice on. I'm not planning to practice anything. Carter. Danny. We looked at each other. He was my best friend and he knew me reasonably well, and what he knew was making him cautious. I understood it. I also understood that I was going to think about the serial and the line and the preliminary assessment for longer than was strictly rational, and there was nothing to be done about that. I didn't see her again for 4 months. She came to Danny and Priya's housewarming in October. I arrived late, a shoot had run long, and she was already there, standing near the bookshelves in the living room, in her own clothes this time. Dark jeans, a paint-stained flannel she'd clearly borrowed from someone larger. Her hair pulled back with something that might have been a chopstick. She was talking to Priya's sister about something that had them both laughing, and I stood in the doorway of the living room for a moment before she registered me. When she did, it was the same assessment, 1 beat. Then, the first impression is holding up, surprisingly. Thank you. That wasn't entirely a compliment. I know. I got a drink. I found a space near her that wasn't pointed or deliberate, just geographically reasonable, and we ended up talking for an hour and a half about photography and painting and the specific problem of making still images do the work of time passing. She was studying painting, had been for 3 years, was finishing her thesis project, which was a series about domestic spaces, empty rooms, objects left behind. The evidence of presence after presence is gone. I told her about the 3 months of empty room photographs after Simone. She didn't flinch from it. What were you looking for in those rooms? I don't know. Some version of an answer I didn't have the question for yet. Did you find it? Not in the rooms. She looked at me steadily. What's the difference between documenting absence and being obsessed with it? Intent? I said. And whether you eventually look up. And did you? Look up? I'm looking up right now. She held the look for a second longer than necessary, and then the chopstick hair arrangement failed entirely, and the hair came down, and she dealt with it with the pragmatic efficiency of someone who had decided this particular battle wasn't worth fighting, and the moment passed the way such moments do, back into the ordinary texture of a party. But she'd asked me what the difference was between documenting absence and being obsessed with it. I thought about that for weeks, too. In November, she graduated. Danny and his parents had a small dinner, and I was invited in my capacity as long-standing family-adjacent presence, and I sat across from Lena for 2 hours while she tolerated her parents' questions about what came next with the patience of someone who had answered the same question many times and was no longer bothered by it. I have a studio space, she said. In the old district, near the waterfront. I'm going to work. And income? Her mother asked. Also work. Different work. Lena, Mom, I'm 22. I have a plan. The plan is to be 22 and have a studio and see what happens. Her father laughed. Her mother did not. Danny caught my eye across the table with an expression that said she's always been like this, since birth. There's no explaining it. After dinner, she and I ended up on the back porch while the dishes were being done inside. It was cold. She had her hands wrapped around a mug of tea that had gone lukewarm an hour ago. You're still here, she said. I was invited. I know. I meant you come to everything. Danny's engagement, the housewarming, now this. Danny's my best friend. Right. The same right Danny had used. It must be a family thing. Do you want me to not come to things? I said. A pause. I didn't say that. Okay. I just noticed the pattern. And? She looked out at the yard. I'm not going to do anything with that observation right now, she said. I'm 22 and I just graduated and I have a studio and I need to see what happens. That's fair. But I noticed. I looked out at the same yard. Dead grass, one tree that had held onto its leaves longer than it should have. A garden bed with the late-season wreckage of what had probably been tomatoes. I'll still be here, I said, when you've finished seeing what happens. She didn't say anything to that, but she didn't go back inside either. We stood there until the cold was genuinely unreasonable, and then her mother called through the back door that there was pie, and we both went in, and I thought, okay, I can wait. What I didn't know, standing on that porch, was that waiting is not a neutral act. Waiting changes what you're waiting for. It grows or it shrinks or it shifts into something else entirely, and you don't always get to choose which one. I was about to find out which one this was going to be. The following year was strange for both of us. I had a run of good assignments. A travel magazine wanted a series on post-industrial American cities, which took me to places I hadn't been and gave me material that was some of the best work I'd done. I was gone for stretches. Danny kept me updated on life at home with his characteristic density of information, 2 lines, 2 or 3 times a month. Enough to know nothing bad had happened. Lena got the studio. She worked in it. She sold 3 paintings through a small gallery in the spring and got a part-time job teaching drawing to kids on Saturday mornings, which she described as an experience in managed chaos that has given me more material than I expected. I knew this from Danny, and occasionally from texts she sent, not frequent, not nothing, calibrated to a frequency I couldn't quite name. She sent me a photo of a painting once, in March. No caption, just the image. A kitchen table in late light, 1 chair pushed back, a cup on the table with something in it, tea maybe or coffee, impossible to tell, and the particular quality of stillness that means the room has just been left. Someone was here, and now isn't. I knew what that painting was about. I'd told her what I'd been trying to find in those empty room photographs. I texted back. You found it, she replied. Working on it. That was March. In June, Danny and Priya had their first anniversary, and a small dinner, and Lena came. She was different in the way of someone who has spent a year working on something real. There was a settledness to her, a quality of having arrived somewhere she'd meant to go. She'd cut her hair. She still had the paint-stained clothes, but they were different paint-stained clothes. She sat across from me at dinner and talked about the work with a directness she'd always had, but that felt, now, more grounded. Like she'd earned the right to speak precisely about it. After dinner, Danny disappeared to deal with something in the kitchen. Priya was on a phone call, and Lena and I were alone in the living room with the remaining wine. You said you'd still be here, she said. I am. A year later. Yes. Still planning to marry me someday? I looked at her. The question was light on the surface, a callback to the joke in the kitchen, but something underneath it wasn't a joke at all. Yeah, I said. That's the plan. She looked at her wine. I've been thinking about that. About the plan? About the someday part? She said. It's an interesting word. Someday. It's a placeholder. It's a word for something you mean but aren't ready to commit to the timeline of. That's accurate. I don't know if I like placeholders. What would you prefer? She looked up. Something more specific would be good. I held that. The living room. The end of dinner. A year between the porch and this couch, and both of us a year older, and her asking me to be more specific. I don't have a specific yet, I said. I want to be honest about that. But I know what I'm building toward. How do you know? Because it's the only direction I keep looking. She was quiet for a moment. That's a good answer, she said. I'm suspicious of good answers. I know. Because my ex had very good answers. Right up until he didn't. What happened? He was a placeholder person. Everything was, someday. Everything was, eventually. 2.5 years and eventually never came. She set her wine down. I finished the thesis. I got the studio. I did the things I said I'd do. And I'm sitting here with very little patience left for someday. I looked at her steadily. Then I'll stop saying someday. Just like that? What would you rather I say? She was quiet for a beat. Then, ask me something real. I put my wine down too. Can I take you to dinner? I said. This week. Not a party, not a family thing. Dinner. You and me. Somewhere I choose because I've thought about it. She held my gaze. The assessment, the inventory, the one long beat of genuine consideration. Thursday, she said. Thursday. Danny came back into the room with dessert, looked at the two of us, and said nothing whatsoever, which was the most meaningful thing he could have said. Thursday was a small Italian place I'd found the previous winter while on an assignment near the waterfront district, the kind of restaurant that doesn't advertise, that exists entirely through word of mouth and stubbornness, where the owner's mother still made the pasta on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons, and the tables were close enough together that you had to choose your conversation topics with some care. I'd thought about the choice for 2 days. That was new for me. I'm not a person who agonizes over logistics in photography. You develop a tolerance for imperfect conditions. You learn to work with what the light gives you, rather than the light you wanted. But I'd thought about Thursday, specifically, about what Thursday was and what it was supposed to be, and I'd wanted to get it right. She was already there when I arrived, 5 minutes early to my 5 minutes early, which told me something. She was in a dark green dress I hadn't seen before, and her hair was down, and she was reading something on her phone with the focused expression she applied to everything. Not casual, not performing casualness, just actually doing the thing she was doing. She looked up when I was 3 tables away and put the phone face down. "You're early," she said. "So are you. I didn't want to be late." "Why?" She looked at me. "Because this is a real thing, and I didn't want to be careless with it." I sat down. I thought, she's going to keep doing that. Saying the exact true thing without framing it or softening it. I thought, I need to meet that with something equivalent. "I've been thinking about this since the kitchen," I said. "The cereal." The line, "I know that sounds June, 3 years ago," she said. "Yes, I know." She unfolded her napkin. "I have been too. We ordered. We talked the real kind, the kind that doesn't perform anything, that goes directly to the things worth saying." She told me about the series she was working on now, which had moved past domestic spaces into something harder to describe. She was painting transitions, not the before and not the after, but the exact moment of change, the threshold, the hinge point. She said, "The hard part is that a hinge point doesn't look like anything when you're in it. You only see it from the other side." Is that what the painting is about? The view from the other side? I think it's about learning to recognize what a hinge point feels like while you're still in it. She said, so you can be present for it instead of only remembering it later. I told her about the post-industrial cities project, the mills, the warehouses, the places where things used to be made and now weren't the specific quality of light in abandoned manufacturing spaces, the way absence accumulates differently in industrial buildings than in domestic ones. In a house, absence is personal. In a factory, it's structural. The absence is in the architecture. What's the difference? She asked. In how you photograph them. In a domestic space, you're looking for the human scale, the cup, the pushed-back chair, the thing someone touched. In industrial space, you're looking for the system, the conveyor, the overhead crane, the layout that tells you how things moved through, and both tell you about absence. Both tell you something left. She held that for a moment. "The painting I sent you," she said. "In March. The kitchen. Yes. That wasn't a domestic space." I looked at her. "It was a transitional space," she said. "The moment right after. The cup still on the table. I know what it was. I sent it to you because I wanted to see if you'd know. And you texted back. You found it. Which told me you did. The restaurant around us was doing its Thursday evening thing, unhurried. Warm. The sound of other people's conversations, creating a kind of ambient privacy. She was watching me with the expression I'd been cataloging for 3 years without naming. I had a name for it now. It was the expression of someone who has decided to trust a structural assessment she's been running for a long time. I want to tell you something, I said. Okay, the someday thing. I said it in the kitchen as a line. I meant it as a line. And then I went home and thought about it for 3 weeks, and somewhere in there it stopped being a line. She was quiet. I don't know exactly when. I know it was before October, because at the housewarming I was already past the point where this was something I could decide about. It had already decided. Things don't decide themselves, she said. This one did. She looked at her wine. I'm going to tell you something I don't usually say out loud. Okay, when Danny told me you were coming to the engagement party, I looked you up. I'd looked you up before. I'd seen your work. I waited. And then you walked into that kitchen, and you were exactly what the work suggested, which is not something I was prepared for. What did the work suggest? Someone who pays attention to what other people walk past. She looked up, and I have a history of being walked past. So, I held that. 3 years of an orbit I'd thought was mine to navigate, and she'd been running the same calculation from the other side, with more information than I'd known she had. Lena, I said. Carter. I'm not going to walk past you. She held my gaze for a long moment, the longest yet. I know, she said. That's the problem. What do you mean? The problem with someone who won't walk past you is that you have to let them actually see you. And she paused. I'm not always easy to see. I know that about myself. I've been looking at you for 3 years. I know. I've seen you in a bridesmaid dress eating cereal at 9 p.m. I've seen you on a cold porch, talking about placeholders. I've seen you paint rooms that hold the shape of something being left behind. Carter. I'm not done. She waited. I've seen you be exactly yourself in every room I've watched you be in, and I have never once wanted to look somewhere else. The restaurant went on around us. She looked at her wine for a moment. When she looked back up, something had resolved. Okay, she said. Okay. Okay. Yes. I'm in this. A beat. I just needed you to say the real version. Not the someday version. The specific version. We stayed at the table for 2 more hours after the plates were cleared, talking about work and family and the studio and the post-industrial cities, and whether any of the things we were both making were about the same underlying question, which we decided they were. The walk back to her car was slow, the way walks are when 2 people are not in a hurry to be anywhere except where they are. At her car, she turned to face me and I kissed her, briefly, and she put one hand flat against my chest for a moment after. The way you check a wall to see if it's load-bearing. Thursday was a good choice, she said. The pasta is made fresh on Thursdays. I know. I looked it up. I laughed on the drive home and kept laughing. The following year was the kind of year that becomes the standard by which you measure the ones after it. We built something in the regular, unglamorous way of 2 people who have actual lives, the Tuesday dinners and the Sunday mornings. The arguments about whose turn it was to deal with whatever needed dealing with, the long drives and the longer silences, and the way she looked when she was in the middle of something she was figuring out, totally unavailable to anything else, which I learned to recognize and leave space for. She had the studio. I had the dark room I'd converted in the 2nd bedroom. We were 10 minutes apart by train, and we'd made no decisions about changing that, which felt like the right pace. Danny was quietly pleased with himself about it. He never said, "I told you so," because there was nothing in the record that constituted him telling me anything I hadn't already arrived at alone, but he had the air of a man who felt that the universe had organized itself correctly and that he deserved some credit for the arrangement of the geography. At minimum, you're good together, he told me, around month 3. I want you to know I mean that as observation, not endorsement. You don't need my endorsement. But you're endorsing it. I'm observing it. Warmly. Priya was more direct. She's different with you. She told me at a dinner in September. She's still Lena, but she laughs more. The real laugh. She laughed before. She laughed at things. Now she laughs with things. I thought about that for a long time. Her parents, who had met me a dozen times over the years in my capacity as Danny's college friend, were now recalibrating me into a different role. Her mother asked questions in the indirect way of a person who has many direct questions she's decided not to ask. Her father was easier. He'd met enough of Danny's friends over enough years that I was familiar territory to him, and what he seemed to care about was whether I showed up when I said I would. I showed up when I said I would. He approved on that basis, which felt like the right basis. Lena told me once, in October, that she'd been afraid of this, not of me specifically, of the shape of it. I've watched people build things together and then have to dismantle them, she said. Danny and I grew up in a neighborhood where it was just what happened. Things were built, and then they weren't. And I decided a long time ago that if I was going to build anything, I was going to make sure I knew what I was building before I started. And now? Now I know what I'm building. How long have you known? She thought about it. Since the kitchen, she said. I knew the kitchen was a hinge point. I just didn't know which direction the hinge was going. Winter arrived. The second winter I'd known her. The first I knew what we were. She spent it deep in the transition series, which was evolving into something she hadn't planned for, less about domestic thresholds and more about large-scale change, industrial and urban, the spaces where one era ends and another hasn't quite started. She came to my darkroom sometimes and we worked in parallel, her on sketches, me in the red light and chemical smell of the developing trays, not talking much because we'd both learned that silence between us was resource, not gap. I was putting together a book proposal. The post-industrial city's work had accumulated into something larger than an assignment series. There was a through line that was becoming visible, about American spaces that held the memory of a purpose they no longer served. A publisher I'd worked with before had asked to see it. I was trying to write the proposal without writing it the way proposals sound, which is the hardest part. Lena read the draft in January and handed it back with 3 sentences circled and a note in the margin. These 3 are the actual argument. The rest is scaffolding. I rewrote the proposal in a day. The publisher said yes in a week. That was January. In February, Danny called me on a Tuesday afternoon, which was not his pattern. I need to tell you something, he said. I sat down. Okay, it's not bad. I want to say that first. Okay. A pause. Priya and I are moving. There's a position she's been offered, in London, and we've decided to take it. We're leaving in May. I held the phone. London. The firm has an office there. I can transfer. It's a real opportunity for her, Carter. It's the thing she's been working toward. I know. I'm not going anywhere. I'm just going to be in a different place. I know. Are you okay? I thought about it honestly. I'm surprised. And I'm going to miss you. And I'm genuinely glad for Priya. That's exactly right. We talked for an hour. By the end of it, I'd processed most of the surprise and arrived at what was underneath it. A sadness that was appropriate, and a recognition that this was the shape of adult life. The way people you love go to different places and remain the people you love. It's not a failure of the friendship. It's just geography. I told Lena that night. She already knew Danny had called her first. I thought so, she said. He's been doing the math on something for a few months. I could see it. You could see it. I know how Danny does math. He gets very careful about small things when he's deciding something big. She had her sketchbook in her lap. She was drawing something I couldn't quite make out, loose lines, preliminary, the early stage where the image hasn't committed to itself yet. Are you okay? I asked. He's my brother. It's going to be weird without him nearby. She paused. But he should go. Priya's career is real, and Danny belongs next to whatever she's doing. That's just who he is. Yeah. She looked at what she'd been drawing and made a decision about one of the lines. It's also going to change the math around us, she said. What do you mean? Part of the architecture of what we are is that Danny is in the middle. He's the shared thing. When he goes, that changes the shape. Does that worry you? She was quiet for a moment. No, she said. It clarifies it. I looked at her. If Danny's the reason we're in each other's lives, then when he leaves, so does the reason. But if Danny's just how we found each other, then when he leaves, what's left is the thing itself. She looked up. I think what's left is the thing itself. I said. I know it is. I just wanted to say it out loud. I know. She went back to the sketchbook. I went back to the proposal edits. We sat in the studio for another 3 hours, and the lines on her page slowly became something that was clearly a doorway, not a door, just the frame, the threshold, the shape of the opening without whatever was on the other side. March was the month it all moved. 3 things in March. Danny and Priya started packing. The publisher confirmed the book a fall release, which meant summer deadlines, and Lena was offered a residency. The residency was in Vermont. 6 months, a shared studio space in a converted farmhouse in the hills, with 7 other artists. It was a serious thing, the kind of opportunity that comes once, maybe twice, in the early years of a career, and that does not wait for convenient timing. She told me on a Wednesday, standing in her kitchen with the letter in her hand, and she handed it to me to read without saying anything first. I read it. I handed it back. You have to go, I said. I know. 6 months. June through November. I did the math. June through November. Danny and Priya leaving in May. A book to deliver by August. 6 months of Lena in Vermont. Okay, I said. Just okay? What do you want me to say? I want you to say what you actually think. I think you have to go. I think this is exactly the kind of thing you've been building toward, and I'm not going to be the reason you don't take it. She looked at me for a long moment. Vermont is 4 hours. I know. I can come back some weekends. I can come up some weekends. It's not the same as Lena. I waited until she met my eyes. Go to Vermont. Finish the series. Come back in November. We'll be fine. She held the letter. Something complicated moved through her expression, relief, maybe, or the particular quality of being seen clearly at a moment when you needed to be. I was afraid you'd say something that made it harder, she said. I know. Or that you'd say it was fine when it wasn't. It's not nothing. 6 months is a long time, and I'm going to miss you, and the timing is bad. Those are all true things. It's also the right call, and you know it. She set the letter down on the counter. She crossed the kitchen and she put her arms around me in the straightforward way she had with things that mattered. No drama, no performance, just the fact of it. I held her. I love you, she said, into my shoulder. She hadn't said it before. Not directly. She'd said it in every other possible way, in the paintings she'd shown me first, in the texts without captions, in the letter she'd handed me before she said anything, but not directly. I love you, I said. She didn't move for a moment. Then, okay. She pulled back and looked at me. I'm going to go to Vermont and finish the best work I've ever done and come back in November. Yes. And when I come back, when you come back, I'll be here. You keep saying that. I keep meaning it. She laughed, the real one, which I had now heard enough times to know it was mine in some particular way, that it lived closer to the surface with me than it did otherwise. I thought about what Priya had said. She laughs with things now. I understood what that meant. April was the last full month before everything moved. Danny and Priya sold most of their furniture. Lena packed the studio into a storage unit, and I helped her carry boxes for an entire Saturday, after which she made dinner and we ate it sitting on the floor of her apartment because she'd already returned the kitchen table to her parents. We ate on the floor and talked about the transition series and what Vermont might do to it, and whether the space in the farmhouse would have good light. North-facing, she said. Good for painting. That's why I took it. What's the second reason? The light, she said. First and second. What else would it be? I thought about her in that farmhouse, in north-facing light, finishing the series. The threshold paintings. The hinge points. The exact moment of change that you can only see fully from the other side. Take photos, I said. You take photos. I know. Take some anyway, so I can see what you're seeing. She looked at me. Okay, she said. Okay. Danny and Priya left on a Thursday. We helped them to the car and stood on the sidewalk, and Danny hugged me for longer than either of us usually tolerated and didn't say anything, which was everything. Priya cried briefly and productively and then got in the car. Lena and Danny held each other for a moment on the curb, and I stepped away to give them that. When the car was gone, Lena and I stood on the empty sidewalk. She put her hands in her pockets. 1 month, she said. 1 month. We went and got coffee. We walked for a long time without direction. By the time we got back to where we'd started, the afternoon had turned, and she had a train to catch, and we stood at the station for a moment in that particular suspension. I'll call you tonight, she said. I know you will. She kissed me once, clean and specific, and went through the turnstile. I stood on the sidewalk with Danny's absence on one side and Vermont on the other and the book to finish, and I thought, this is a hinge point. Right here. I can feel it. And then I thought, she'd be proud of me for recognizing it while I was still in it. What I didn't know, standing on that sidewalk in April, was that the hinge was swinging faster than I thought. That Vermont was going to do something to the transition series that neither of us had predicted. That November was going to arrive with a question I'd been circling for 3 years, and that the answer was going to come from her, not me, in a way I could not have scripted if I'd tried. Vermont did what good residencies do. It removed everything that wasn't the work. She called me the first night from the farmhouse, describing it in the spare way she had with things she was still processing: the shared kitchen, the studio space with its north-facing windows, the particular quality of silence in the hills that was different from city silence. Not absence of sound, presence of a different sound. She said, "It sounds like something breathing." I said, "Good or unsettling?" She thought about it. "Both. I think that's the point." We found a rhythm. Tuesday and Thursday calls, sometimes Sunday mornings when neither of us had commitments. She sent photos, not of the paintings, not yet, but of the landscape, the studio light at different hours. Once the farmhouse kitchen at 6 a.m. with the mist still on the hills outside the window and no caption. I knew what that one was. It was the same grammar as the kitchen painting she'd sent in March, 2 years ago. Someone was here. The mist was the cup on the table. I sent her photos back. The bookwork, mostly I was in the final push, sequencing the post-industrial images into a narrative that held together, which is the hardest stage, the stage where you can see all the pieces and can't yet see the shape they make. She sent back notes. Not many, but precise. She had the eye for structure that came from thinking in paint. She could see where an image was doing too much work, where a sequence had a gap it was trying to talk over. "This one," she wrote, next to a photograph of an abandoned stamping plant in Ohio, "is the argument. Everything before it should be building to this, and everything after should be consequence. Does your current sequence do that?" It didn't. I resequenced. It was better. I drove up in July, a long weekend, taking the mountain route, because the light on the way was worth it. She met me in the driveway of the farmhouse in paint-stained clothes and bare feet, and squinted at the car like she was assessing its structural integrity. "You drove 4 hours," she said. "Yes, for a long weekend. The light on the mountain route. Carter." "What?" She smiled, the real one, and came and hugged me with paint on her hands and left 2 ochre handprints on the back of my jacket, which I discovered later and which I did not have cleaned. She showed me the studio that afternoon. The series had changed. She'd warned me, in calls, that it was going somewhere she hadn't planned, but seeing it was different. The transition paintings were still there, the threshold logic, but now they'd opened into something larger, something about civic space, about the places where communities had made decisions and then unmade them. She'd painted 3 images of what I recognized as the architectural language of town halls, not specific ones, composite ones, the vocabulary of a building type that means something, columns, high windows, the particular weight of a structure meant to hold deliberation. "Where did that come from?" I said. "From your work," she said simply. "The industrial spaces." I started thinking about what those buildings were built for, not just what they made, what they meant. And then I started thinking about the other buildings that meant something and are now empty. Civic space. The places where we used to decide things together, and now don't. She'd painted them in the transitional grammar, not abandoned, not in use, but at the threshold. The hinge point between still meaning something and not. "Lena," I said, "too much?" "It's the best thing you've ever done." She looked at the paintings. "I think so too," she said, with the directness she had about things she'd already assessed and finished being uncertain about. "It scares me a little." "Why?" "Because I don't know if I could have made it without being here. Without the space and the quiet and she paused, without the room to follow it where it went. But you did make it. I'm making it. It's not done. When you finish it, it's going to be real." She looked at me sideways. "You keep saying things like that. You keep being right." She laughed and leaned her head against my shoulder for a moment, looking at the paintings. North-facing light, late afternoon, the hills going green-gold outside the high windows. I took a photograph, the only one I took of her in Vermont. She's not looking at the camera. She's looking at the work, and her expression is the one that means she's seeing something clearly. It's in the book. She doesn't know yet that it's in the book. The long weekend was good in the way of things that are finite, and therefore lived completely. We cooked in the farmhouse kitchen with 2 of the other residents, a sculptor from Portland named Greta and a printmaker named Sam, who had the air of someone running from something and the work ethic of someone running toward something else. Lena was different with them than she was in the city, looser, more lateral in conversation, willing to follow an argument somewhere unexpected. I watched her across the kitchen table and thought, this is what happens when someone is in exactly the right place. They expand into the space. I drove back Monday morning. She stood in the driveway again, this time with coffee, and we said goodbye in the practical way we'd developed, not prolonged, not minimized, just accurate. "November," she said. "November. I'm going to finish the series." "I know. And the book? Deadline's August 15th. "I'll make it. You'll make it." She said it the way I said things back to her sometimes, not reassurance, just a statement of what she'd assessed to be true. Drive safe. Always. I drove the mountain route home. The light was different going south, harder, more direct. I thought about the civic space paintings. I thought about what she'd said, I don't know if I could have made it without being here. And I thought about what that meant, about space, about what you need around you to become what you're becoming. I delivered the book on August 14th. The publisher called 2 days later to say it was exactly what they'd hoped for and that the sequencing was strong. I thought about Lena's note in the margins of the proposal. These 3 are the actual argument. I thought about the photograph I'd taken in the Vermont studio that was now in the book without her knowledge. I thought about what I was going to do in November. I'd been circling it since July. Not anxiously, it wasn't anxiety. It was the same feeling I got in the late stages of a book, when you can see the shape the pieces make, and you're waiting for the moment of clarity that tells you the sequence is right. I knew what I was building. I just needed to know when. Danny called from London in September, which he did every few weeks, and he asked how things were, and I told him about the book and the Vermont visits, and he listened in the way he listened, which was completely, "Carter," he said. "Yeah. What are you going to do when she comes back?" "What do you mean?" "You know what I mean." I was quiet for a moment. "I'm working on it. Don't work on it too long, Danny. I'm her brother. I'm allowed. You're 4,000 miles away. The phone works fine from here. A pause. She's going to come back from Vermont, different, bigger. The work she's doing up there, she called me about it. I know what it is. She's going to come back having finished something that changes what she is. And the question is whether you're ready to stand next to that. I'm ready. I know. I'm asking if you're going to show it. I sat with that. The particular challenge of being someone who has spent his career building things people experience without knowing what they're responding to. The question of whether I could stop making myself invisible at the moment when being visible was the only right thing. Yeah, I said. I'm going to show it. Good. A beat. Carter. What? I'm glad you're the person she found. I didn't say anything for a moment. Me too. I finally managed. October. The series was almost done, she called to tell me, late on a Tuesday, with the particular quality in her voice that meant something had resolved. I finished the last one today, she said. I stood in front of it for an hour. I didn't touch it. What does it look like? It's a courthouse, she said. Empty. Late. Light. The doors are open, but nobody's going in or coming out. And it's not sad, she said. That's the thing. I kept thinking it would be sad, all that civic weight, all that abandoned meaning. But it's not. It's a threshold. The doors are open. The building is waiting. For what? For someone to go in. I held the phone. Come home, I said. A pause. 3 weeks. I know. Come home anyway. She laughed. Carter. I know. 3 weeks. 3 weeks, she said. And then, I'll be home. She called the last Friday of October to tell me the residency had wrapped early, a scheduling thing with the farmhouse. Nothing complicated, and she was driving back Sunday. 2 weeks ahead of schedule. I had 2 days. I spent them in the way I spend the final days before something important, which is not panicked and not ostentatiously calm but present. Fully present, attending to exactly what's in front of me. I finished some outstanding edit requests for the book. I went to the grocery store and bought food she'd actually want because I knew what she wanted. I'd learned that over 18 months. I went to a shop I'd been in once before and made a decision I'd already made, weeks ago. And made it formally now. Sunday she texted at noon. On the road. At 2. A photo, the highway, the hills already in their October color. No caption. At 4. 2 hours. At 5:45. Parking. I went downstairs. She was pulling her bags from the trunk, in the paint-stained flannel from the housewarming she'd brought it to Vermont. Apparently, worn it into some kind of talisman, and she looked up when she heard the door and her face did the thing it did sometimes. The thing I'd catalogued and never tried to name because naming it felt like it would make it smaller. Hi, she said. Hi. She left the bags where they were and came to me, and I held her right there on the sidewalk with the October wind doing its work and the trunk still open, and she smelled like turpentine and the particular cold of the Vermont hills, and I thought, there it is. That's the frequency. Everything else I've built has been practice for knowing what this sounds like when it's right. I finished it, she said, into my jacket. I know, it's the best thing I've ever done. I know that too. She pulled back and looked at me, the inventory look, and then she looked around at the sidewalk, the city, the ordinary Sunday evening of it, with the expression of someone recalibrating after months of a different scale. It's loud, she said. You'll adjust. I know. A beat. I brought the last painting back. In the car. I want to see it. I'll show you. But first, she stopped. First what? She looked at me with the exact expression she'd had on the back porch of Danny's parents' house 4 years ago, when she'd said I'm not going to do anything with that observation right now. The same expression, but the other side of it. The resolution, not the suspension. First, I need to say something. Okay. I've been thinking, she said, about hinge points, about how you only see them clearly from the other side, and about how the thing I've been trying to paint is the ability to recognize them while you're in them. Yes. I've been in one for 6 months, and I think she stopped, reorganized. I think the thing I've been making work toward is a question, not a statement. The series isn't about empty civic space. It's about the moment before someone decides to walk through the door. Yes, I said quietly. And a breath I've been carrying something since July. Since the long weekend, when you drove up and you looked at the work and said it was the best thing I'd ever done before it was done. And I should have said it then, but I had the series to finish and I needed to not be distracted from the series. Lena, I'm saying it now. She reached into the pocket of the flannel, the paint-stained too big flannel, and she took out something small. Something she'd made, I could see that immediately. A ring. Simple, thin, silver, with a small raised detail that I recognized. When I looked closer, as the hexagonal tile pattern from the telegraph office floor. The one we'd stood over 2 years before she was mine, and she'd touched with 2 fingers to confirm it was real. I looked at it, then at her. I told you, I don't like placeholders, she said. Her voice was steady. I told you someday was a word for something you meant but weren't ready to commit to the timeline of. And you've been carrying something since July, too. I can see it. I've seen it every call, every visit. I know how you look when you've already decided something. Lena, let me finish. A breath. I'm asking you to marry me. Because the hinge point is right now, right here, and I'm not going to stand in it and wait for one of us to recognize it from the other side. We're both here. The door is open. The Sunday evening street. Her trunk still open. The October wind. I put my hand in my jacket pocket. She watched me, and something shifted in her expression as I pulled out what I'd gone to the shop to collect 2 days ago, having already decided weeks before that. A ring. Different metal, different detail. I'd used the photograph from the telegraph office, the one I'd taken when she wasn't looking, the tile floor beneath her 2 fingers, and had the jeweler work from that. Same tile, different ring, same source. She stared at it. July, I said. Since July. You're right. Carter, you asked me to be specific. 3 years ago. You said you didn't like placeholders, so here's specific. I've known since the kitchen. I've known since the cereal and the line and the preliminary assessment. I've been building toward this since before I could say it, and I've had this in my jacket since Friday, and I've been waiting for the right moment. And the right moment I stopped. Is right now, she said. Is right now. We stood there on the sidewalk, each holding what we'd made for the other, and she started laughing, the real laugh, the one that was mine. That lived closer to the surface with me than anywhere else, and I was laughing too. And a woman walking past us with a dog slowed down, and looked, and kept walking, and the trunk was still open, and none of it mattered. Which one do we? She started. Both, I said. Both. She put hers on my hand. I put mine on hers. They weren't the same. They weren't meant to be. They were 2 people who'd made something for each other from the same source material, which seemed exactly right. She looked at her hand, then at mine, then at me. I drove 4 hours from Vermont with a ring in my glove compartment, she said. I walked 3 blocks to a jeweler on Friday with a photograph of a tile floor. We're the same kind of person. We are. That's either very good or very alarming. Very good, I said. Definitely. She kissed me, right there on the Sunday sidewalk, and I put my arms around her, and she was back from Vermont, and the series was done, and the book was done, and Danny was in London being happy, and the tile floor that had been under everything for a century was under glass now where it could be seen, and the courthouse doors were open, and someone had finally walked through. We got her bags from the trunk. We went upstairs. She unwrapped the last painting, the courthouse, late light, doors open, the threshold without drama. Just the fact of the opening, and we leaned it against the wall and stood in front of it for a while, not saying anything, because it didn't need anything said. Later, she made tea and I made toast and we sat on the floor of my apartment because she said she'd gotten used to the Vermont scale of things and the furniture felt too formal. And we sat on the floor and talked about what came next, where, when, the practical architecture of combining two lives that had been parallel for long enough that the merge would need some thought. She had opinions. I had opinions. Some of them were the same opinion and some of them weren't, and all of it was the specific version, the committed to the timeline version, the opposite of someday. Around midnight, she leaned her head back against the couch behind her and looked at the ceiling. "The title," she said. "Of the series?" "Yes." I couldn't figure it out. All summer. "And now?" She turned her head to look at me. "Threshold," she said. "Just that." "Yes," I said. "That's exactly right." She smiled. "The real one." I took her hand, the one with the ring, the tile floor ring, the one made from what we'd both been standing over before either of us had said a word about what it meant, and she turned her palm up and held on. That's the whole story. Or the part worth telling. The rest of it is just the good, ordinary architecture of two people who figured out what they were building before they ran out of time to build it. The mornings, and the work, and the arguments about the furniture, and the Thursday dinners, and the book signing in October, where she stood in the back of the room and caught my eye across 60 people when the publisher said, "Phrase the evidence of presence," and we both understood, privately, exactly what that meant and where it had come from. The courthouse painting sold to a municipal arts collection. It hangs in a building that's still used, still doing its work, still holding the weight of people making decisions together. She said that was the right place for it. I think she's right. The ring is still on my hand. The tile floor is still under the glass. Some things, when you decide they're worth keeping, you keep. Sometimes the question gets asked before you ask it by someone who's been watching the same hinge point you've been watching and got there first. The real kind of love doesn't wait for the perfect speech. It shows up on a Sunday sidewalk with something it made from the thing you both once stood over together. Have you ever been in a moment where you realized the other person had already decided something you were still working up the courage to say, where you both arrived at the door at the same time from different directions? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. If this story landed somewhere real, leave a like. And if you want to hear more stories like this one, subscribe and hit the bell. I'll be here.